My name's Adam Martin. I'm an alcoholic. Due to God, AA, and sponsorship, I've been sober since April 29, 2013. And, want to thank Susan and Cody for coordinating and the committee for having this conference and inviting Jeff and I to come down, and Jeff riding back and forth yesterday and today. Well, I've been going to AA, probably since 2000. I've been sober since 2013. Went to a lot of, I feel like you're the warden, walking up here. To me, like the way the speakers usually were broke down was like Friday night was like the entertaining one, Saturday night was like the depth and weight kind of entertaining, and then Sunday was like the spiritual kind of speaker, and like I think of like Tom Brady Jr. and Southern Bat. Like I'm not Tom Brady Jr. just so you know, and I'm not. If you skip church to come here for a spiritual talk, I'm sorry. So, I sobered up in 2013. Prior to that, growing up, my mom and dad were in the military, so I was kind of an army brat, kind of all over the place. I wish that was just the story. My mom and dad met in treatment, so while they were in the military. So my dad was there for drinking, and my mom was there for drugs. So I was pretty much screwed from the start. They met in treatment and probably conceived me there, and they were like, "This is a really good idea," But my dad ended up going to AA. My mom kind of just got busy with work, and then I never really saw her drink or anything until after she retired. But my dad went to Moorhead Thursday night. He was kind of a member there, and sponsored, off and on over the years by a guy named Chuck. And I was the kid at the meetings that was kind of like super ADHD, up and down, talking during the meeting and stuff. Probably, made a lot of people upset. But there were always like a group of women that were at the meeting that kind of like mother hen me and would like take care of me so my dad could hear the message. And so my first example of Alcoholics Anonymous was my dad. And what I remember is that like when he wasn't going to AA, I never really saw him. Like he would just like disappear for weeks at a time. And then when I did see him, he was like drunk, passed out, naked on the couch. And my mom would we had this staircase by the couch, and he'd be passed out naked with a beer and a cigarette. And my mom would like try to cover my eyes, and she'd be like, "Oh, he's sick or whatever." And then my dad would like wake up. He'd be like, "Woman, I'm not sick. I partied like a rock star last night." And I'm like, got one eye open. I was like, "He's amazing." It's like, and that's like really the only memory I had of like him drinking. And then when he sobered up for like a year, and he started coming to like all my baseball games, and I was in Cub Scouts, and he would come to Cub Scouts with me and stuff, and he was just like really involved. And I didn't know that AA was like having that. I just knew he wasn't drinking, And what happened to him, like the last time I really saw him until he passed away like 10 years ago was I was in like third grade, and we were at Cub Scouts, and the night before the Pinewood Derby car race, and I didn't have anything made. And my dad was a custodian or like a janitor for a school, and there's like this wood shop over in like South Fargo over by like the Clara Barton district or whatever. And so my dad like had connections in this underworld wood making and he took me to this shop, and then like we made it that night and painted it black, yellow lightning streak on it, put the weights on it. And then the next day we went to do the races, and I started like beating everybody, right? And my dad was there, and he was watching, and that was all I really cared about. It was like him watching me win. That's and then I lost, and then I just like started crying like a third grader, like snot and water down my face, and then my dad, he was like, he just came up to me, and he was like, he never really like wanted to talk about like feelings. You know, it was just his way of like showing love was like, I will race you to the end of the gym and back. And that's all he said. And before I even finished, I just took off running. And I turned around and he's hobbling. Part of the reason he wasn't in the military anymore is he had got drunk when he went to go pick up a private and bring him back to base. And on the way back, they got in a car accident and that private died. And so he was discharged from the military, and he was like, from what I hear, he was never really the same after that. And so like he's hobbling, and then I make it to the end, and then I start running back, and then all of a sudden he like turned on boosters and did not let me win, so I just lost again. And I was like, I don't know if you get this father thing, but I was like so happy. Like I didn't even care about the race anymore, and like that was the type of person that my dad turned into when he was participating in this fellowship and doing the steps. Like he was willing to like put his body in pain to like make his family happy. He got a year sober, and I don't know what really happened. I just know that my mom told me that nobody like recognized him, or like, you know, no one called him, or, you know, or whatever. That's probably a drunk dad telling my mom what, you know, or whatever. But he got drunk, and then I didn't see him again until he was we were at a funeral like 10 years ago. So, but I always remembered that like that was like the seed that my dad was a better dad when he was going to AA, right? And so I didn't even know that that was going to be a seed for me. So now that I'm done with my Al-Anon story, I'm going to move on to my story. So my first drink, like the first time I got drunk, it was keg beer, and it was down by the river with a bunch of college guys. I was like 13 years old, and it was like super cool. Like they just like accepted. I mean, today, I mean, they probably would be in jail for that, but like back, you know, whatever amount of years ago that was, it was just, I felt cool, like. And the effect took hold of me, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, I want to do this as much as I can all the time. And I don't think it was because like I was going through like a severe amount of trauma, or, you know, or that my childhood, like it was kind of dysfunctional. My dad was drunk all the time and stuff, but I didn't like feel, it felt normal. Like it wasn't like, you know, I looked at other kids and I'm like, I'm different than other kids, and I feel restless and irritable, or, you know, not really connect. Like that came later, probably more in my like 20s than it did when I was a kid. But I never really did good at school, and they would, like, even in first grade, they'd give me this, I'd have to bring home a piece of red construction paper to tell my mom that I behaved that day. And then I found the red construction paper, and so I started cutting my own, you know, and bringing it home and showing it to her. And then when we did the parent-teacher conference, she's like, what is going on? And then even in high school, like when I started drinking a lot more and stuff, I just don't do well in the memorization kind of settings and test taking and stuff. You know, they would say things like he has so much potential, you know, like Jeff was talking about, and I kind of like, I didn't even know what that word meant either, and I was just like, apparently I'm amazing, you know, everywhere I go. And then I had a teacher who kind of, you know, I had all Fs. I had one B in science class, which was weird because I just wasn't really into science. And he told me, like, my mom was like crying every time, like everywhere we went, because of all the stuff that I was putting her through courts, juvenile detention, getting kicked out of school, and, you know, like just literally everything. And then we met this teacher, and he just told my mom, he's like, your boy, your son's different. And he's just not like a traditional student. He's going to go through a lot of crap, but he's going to end up being a leader one day. And even if he was lying his ass off, right? My mom was like tears of joy, and that was like the epitome of my childhood with my mom, single mom raising boys. She just wanted so much for us to like succeed. And she worked overnights and never really saw us, and it was just, we were just running amok to the point where we're in our trailer, we were drinking all the time, and she was there, and she was just like, as long as the cops don't show up. That's the only rule. Like before it was just like, make sure you get up and make your bed, you know, do good in school, to the, you know, in high school it's like, just, I don't want the cops to show up. and so, and if you go to jail, I'm not bailing you out. Those are like the two rules. And the last time that I, out in there, I had stole a U-Haul by Chumley's in Moorhead and robbed, this company that I was working for that was actually all people in AA worked at, right? That's where that's how I got the job. Like the owner, the workers all go into this Northern Plains group on Tuesday nights, and that's how I got the job. And I stole this U-Haul, and I go and start breaking into buildings. Somehow I end up at that job, and I take the laptops and the copy machines, and I even took the dilly bars out of the freezer and threw it in the back of this U-Haul, and I was gonna go sell it on the black market. And I was like, I don't know where that is. I bet it's in Minneapolis. And so I just started driving to Minneapolis to find the black market. And I made it to Detroit Lakes and got a hotel, and I passed out, blacked out, and woke up, and I could smell the cigarette butts and the alcohol before I even opened my eyes, and that just, there's keys, and I couldn't remember, and then it all pieced together when I opened the door and I saw an Isuzu U-Haul truck or whatever, and opened up the back, and there's just a bunch of stolen goods in there, and I did it again. Real Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type stuff where, I was doing things I would never even do, I wouldn't do sober, right? That was kind of the beginning for me, is that I do some crazy stuff when I'm drunk. And I just want to say that, the stuff I did when I was drunk doesn't make me an alcoholic, but it was the beginning for me to see that I'm different, right? And so I do what I think all good felons do, is I ran home to my mom's house, and I parked the U-Haul down the road, and I went to her house, and she was like, how did you get here? And I was like, don't worry about it. And then the cops showed up doing the good cop, bad cop thing, and then they, didn't have enough evidence, and they left, and so my mom got me a bus ticket to go to Alabama to go stay at my grandma's house, and then I was going to go to Mexico, right? And that was this is, the plan, 7 years. That was the statute of limitations was 7 years. But the problem was that by the time I was going to get there, I was going to have warrants out, and you had to have a passport, and you had all this stuff, and I would have just got picked up and brought back. And that was my intro, very shortly after I came to AA, right? I showed up, you were graceful to me, you brought me to meetings, you let me sleep on couches, right? You helped me get jobs. You did all these really super nice things for me, and then I robbed you, and I lied to you, and I stole from you, and I manipulated you. And so most of my four-step consisted with AA members, right? There was a lot of stuff that happened prior, but I came to AA when I was 20, right? And so most of my drinking happened between 20 and when I sobered up when I was 31. So it was just a wreck of going through there. And when I came back, I definitely was not going to the Northern Plains group, right? They know who I am. I'm going to go to meetings where they don't know who I am, and I can, essentially then I could be whoever I wanted to be, but then in my head I justified it as they'll treat me like a human being, if I go to a meeting that they don't know me. And I drank a little bit longer, another week or so, and then I woke up in this apartment, and I was not on the lease, and I was being evicted, and the rooms were rooms of trash and dirty clothes, and I was working at a tech firm, and every time I wasn't showering anymore, I wasn't shaving, I wasn't essentially I was wearing a suit and never showered is where I was going with my sales career. And to the point where people were like, man, who farted? No one did. It was me. I smelt that bad. So I had to adjust to be oh, it was me, whoever smelled the Delta, and try to just they it off. And I was just this chameleon of darkness, just trying to use humor to navigate through life. And they fired me for my drinking. And I got drunk that night, and that was the last time that I drank. And I woke up in this naked, with a cigarette butt and a beer, right? And all my clothes had been worn for 3 months, 4 months, not washed in that room. Beer cans everywhere, cigarette butts on the floor. Even outside the balcony, I lived on the 3rd floor. There's like urine all over the snow and beer cans and stuff. Like, you know, I've heard some people they're like, yeah, I hated trash day because all the clinking of the bottles and stuff like that. I really had no shame. I did not care. I just threw them off the balcony, and people would, you know, call, like cops would show up and they'd be like, you got to slow down. And, you know, roommates would just not, they just couldn't take. So, but in the other room, the room that I didn't use, that I was being evicted from, there was a big book in the center of the room, right? And every time I drank and I went to the bathroom and I looked over, I always saw it. And it made me so angry every time I saw it, right? But I did nothing about it. It's like it felt like having a pebble in my shoe, you know what I mean? And just like not doing anything about it and just dealing with, you know what I mean? Just walking with the pebble. And so that day came, and I picked up and I read the doctor's opinion, and, you know, the doctor's opinion is not really an emotional, you know, writing, but as I'm reading it, I'm just like bawling because it's telling me what's wrong with me, right? It was talking about how I have this phenomenon of craving, and that, like, you know, I'm not the guy that can just just not get drunk. Right? If the goal is to not get drunk, I'm never going to achieve it because alcohol hits my body and I have this abnormal reaction to it, right? Kind of like Jeff talked about with like the bananas yesterday, right? Like that makes sense to me and we laugh about it, right? But it's like crazy when you replace it with alcohol, the lengths that I go to try and control and enjoy my drinking. And so I read it, and then I walked over to, I lived by the bowler in South Fargo, and I was walking, and it's fun. It's crazy how fast that obsession of the mind can twist, like those mental blank spots and those mental twists that happen. Because from the time of crying, reading through the doctor's opinion, to walking to the payphone to call someone for help, I had convinced myself to go to the bowler and get drunk, right? One last time. The call will be a lot easier if I have a few beers in me, right? Maybe I'm overreacting, right? I just need to get a girlfriend, get my kids back, get a car, right? Like I just need to like manage better. And then this little thought popped in my head. It was like, why don't you put an ounce into your recovery as you do into drinking and see what happens, right? I realized that verbiage is in the back of the book in one of the stories. I did not know that at the time. I thought God himself, right? Which probably did. And so I had 50 cents in my pocket, and I just happened to know a guy's number in AA, and I called him, and he's seen it all. For those years between 2001 and 2013, he had seen me come back, get sober, leave, get drunk, steal, lie. Like, he'd seen it all. And he was the only one I was comfortable enough to call at that moment because he never I mean, he probably judged me, but he never like led with it. Like he would like bust my balls a little bit about stuff, but then he would help me. You know what I mean? And it wasn't like in an authoritarian way. It was just more like brothers, like hard, tough love, kind of whatever. And so I call Andre and I'm like, hey, dude, can you come pick me up? And I want to get sober again. I promise. And I'm making all these promises, these empty promises. I'm not going to talk to any new girls, right? I'm going to go to a meeting every day. I'm going to go to treatment, like all this stuff. And he was like, you don't have to, like, let's just do recovery. And I was like, all right, will you come pick me up? And he's like, no. And I was like, what an ass, right? I just threw myself out there. And he's like, what I didn't realize is Andre was like 10 years sober, and it's pretty common, even at 10 years sober, to not have a driver's license because of DUIs in the past. So he couldn't come get me. And so he was like, but you can come to my house. And I'm like, where do you live? And he lived by the airport in North Fargo, and I was by the bowler in South Fargo. And I was like, this is a lot of ounce of effort just to get some help. And I start walking, and by like halfway there, my thighs are bleeding Because it's like a 2.5-hour walk to get there. And I get there and knock on the door, he's not even home. And man, like, it's like the racy mind and resentments and anger and all that stuff, like, and the entitlement that comes with, like, my ego, where it was just like, he knows I was going to be here. This is what always happened. People say they're going to help you, and then they don't show up, which is not true. That's literally never happened to me. But in my head, it happens every day, right? They're taking advantage of me. He was just telling me what he wanted to hear. And then as I'm like, going through my head, like convincing myself to leave, Andre comes riding his bike around the corner, and he's like a young Native American, long hair, and it was like Baywatch, right? And I was just like so happy. He wasn't even wearing shoes on his bike and stuff. He was just like so content. If you've ever met Andre, he just seems content all the time, right? And he comes, and then he like walks up the steps. I'm sitting on the steps. It's like 95 degrees outside. I just walked 2.5 hours. I'm overweight, right? Like, I want a Diet Coke and a donut. You know what I mean? Like, I am. And he just like walks by me, and he's like, oh, you could have went in the house and waited. And I was like, and then he patted me on the head and then like walked in, and I was like, I do not like this kid, right? And I'm not going to go in some person's house when I've been in jail for burglary 3 times, right? And I walk in there, and he was like, man, you stink. And I was like, this is dumb. I don't even know why I'm here. And he was like, how about you go take a shower? There's a razor in there. I can get you some clothes. And I look at Andre, and Andre's like half my size. I was like, man, I'm going to put on your shirt. I'm going to look like I shop at Baby Gap, right? And he's like, no, I have guys sleep on my couch all the time. I got a bunch of clothes or whatever. And so I get, and then he just does what we do. He just he didn't make a big deal about it. If anything, I just started telling him my story, and he wasn't impressed at all, right? It was just like, if I go to church and tell half my stuff or whatever, people are like, he's going to hell. I'm pretty sure there's no amount of grace. But I go to AA, like, for instance, when I got my license back and I was like 6 months sober, I went to my boss at this tech company that I worked at, and I was just like, Justin, you'll never guess what happened today. And he was like, doing his keyboard thing, not really looking at me or giving me attention. And I was like, I got my driver's license today. And then he stops, and he looks at me, and he was like, I've had mine since I was 16. And I was like, I'm going to AA. And so I went to AA, and I told everyone, they like got standing ovations and stuff. It's like, I belong here. And I'm an oversharer, so some of that stuff happens in public, and people are just like, oh my God, And so when I got my license, let me tell you a quick story. When my story consists of, I don't believe that the fellowship can keep you sober, but they are a huge activator to getting you getting you to the point of surrender and recovery and going through the steps and stuff like that. I don't think I would have done it if I wouldn't have heard the stories in the fellowship of people and their surrenders, right? And sponsorship and being of service. Like when Cody talked about the ugly grace earlier, it's not that grace is ugly. It's literally the most beautiful thing we can do in AA. But sometimes the work sucks. Right? It feels ugly having to answer the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning. It feels ugly to have to go out of your way before you're supposed to be at work to give a new guy a ride to work. Some of the stuff that we do here is not being done out there, and us doing it here is actually what sets us apart as a spiritual organization, right? Not asking for anything in return, just giving rides. And Fred, I met Fred at a meeting, and I just got a job. I lived out in Horace. I was working in West Fargo. I didn't even know how I was going to get back and forth to work, let alone be an outside sales guy to get all to my appointments and stuff. And I said something at a meeting, and Fred's like, well, I'll pick you up tomorrow and bring you to work. So he's going to drive from South Fargo to Horace, bring me to work, and then go to work. And then after work, he was going to pick me up, bring me back out to Horace, and then he was going to go home. That was 44 miles for him, right? And so on the way home of the second day, I was like, man, I am so grateful. And I have this weird ego where I don't like asking for help, right? It's probably not that weird, but on the way home, I was like, Fred, I am so appreciative of you helping me get back and forth to work. I'm trying to set the tone for tomorrow to ask him to give me a ride tomorrow. And I was like, that is a nice shirt, And I was like, so what are you doing tomorrow, Fred? And he was like, apparently I'm coming to pick you up, because that's what you're like setting it up for. And I was like, oh, I mean, if it's not too much trouble, I'll give you money, pay for gas. And he was like, no, don't worry about it. And then he just kind of cut to the chase, and he was just like, until something comes up, how about I just pick you up in the mornings and give you a ride to work, and then I'll pick you up after work. And that was like, he did that for like 3 months, Monday through Friday. And the day that he couldn't do it anymore was the same day that I got a license in a car, right? I don't know where I'd be today if Fred wouldn't have done that. That was the fellowship, right? Someone in the fellowship who had been through the steps and was like practicing those principles. And and then when I got my license, man, because of all the rides that I gotten, like it just created this like action loyalty to like give rides to everyone. Like I was at meetings being like, you need a ride? Do you need to go anywhere? I need to go to Bismarck. I got you, right? And it was just like, and through sponsorship and going like through the steps and stuff, one of the things that I found that is like, the most spiritual thing that I think that we can do in the rooms of AA is pivot, right? Not just like in life, but like in the circles, You see them happen like at the meetings, the little circles, the cliques, that happen at the meetings. You hang out with your friends, or you got some guys that are looking for sponsees, so they're talking to all the new guys. But there always seems to be like a guy who's kind of outside that circle that's like wants to be in the circle, but too prideful to ask, and no one's really noticing it. Like, I've seen more people like get sober and stay sober because one guy in there noticed them and just pivoted like, a little bit to make that guy feel like he was included, right? And there's like, he didn't say anything, he didn't really do anything. And I think that pivot is more important in our rooms than the speakers that we have, or like even like what kind of meeting function we have, or I think sometimes we get really bent out of shape with like, we have to have the right policies or the rules, or like we have to have a speaker meeting, or we have to have a big book study or whatever. But all of it really doesn't matter if we're not doing stuff, right? I heard a preacher one time ask a guy, he was like, when you read the Bible, what does Jesus tell you to do, right? And he was like, well, I read this scripture and I learned it in Greek and I learned it in Hebrew and the context to this or whatever. And then that was his response. And he was like, yeah, but what did you do, right, with that information? Well, I told a guy about it, and like it just seems to be, we get really technical on like making sure we do it the absolute right way, or understand the word in the big book so much that we get so preoccupied with being right than we do with being of service, right? And I did the same thing. I was in assembly, I was the area chair or area institutions chair. I've been the GSR and stuff, and I just get to a point where I just like, it's more about me being right and getting my opinion across than it is to actually just be like, walk away from it and just go help somebody, right? I'm not saying that's everyone. Like that was my battle, right? And then I noticed I really enjoy like just talking to new people. I think that's just like my thing, right? And through that, like Jeff sponsored me most of my sobriety, and as we were going through the steps, like I kind of just did this like 2-step thing where I was like always practicing step 12, right, as I was going through the steps, going through 1, doing 12, going through 2, doing 12, right, and and so like before I even had my car, how much time I got? Okay. Before I even had my car, and Fred was giving me rides back and forth, we go to meetings every once in a while, and I was at a meeting, and this guy who's like, I just got done sharing, right? And like, I'm like I just think I'm just like amazing, like, sharing and like, the promises are on page and accept, whatever. And this guy comes up to me, he's got his hat cocked, right? He's got like a chain wallet, he's wearing a jersey, pretty much straight out of treatment. Comes up to me, he's like, yo, bro, I heard what you had to say in that meeting, and I think you should sponsor me. And I was like, I'm like 3 months sober, probably less than that. And I was just like, And I had just got done talking with my sponsor about like being a service at the meetings. And I was like, oh, yeah, of course I will, fine sir. We'll go to 3 meetings a week, and we'll meet once a week and go through the steps and this and that. And he was like, all right, cool. And then we could exchange numbers, and then we walked away. And he was like, oh, by the way, if you could pick me up for a meeting tomorrow, that'd be great, right? And I was like, oh, I got you, bro, right? And now I'm like anxious, and I have no idea how I'm going to pick this guy up, and I'm going to completely plummet my first opportunity at sponsorship. So I go in and tell my sponsor, and I was like, dude, I picked up a sponsee. And he was like, are you crazy? And I was like, what? He was like, when I said be of service, I meant like vacuum the meeting. You don't even have a car. And I was like, yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy? And so then on the way to work the next day, I was like, hey, Fred, what are you doing tonight? And he was like, I don't know. I was like, after you pick me up from work, we should go to a meeting. And he was just like, oh, okay, well, yeah, cool. I was like, cool. And so then he picks me up after work, and then we're on our way to the meeting, and I was like, hey, Fred, I met this dude the other day, and we should like stop by and pick him up. And that was like my whole first year, 6 months of sponsoring people was like, I got to sponsor people because you guys were like super graceful to like help me sponsor people. And then I'd meet with my sponsor and then regurgitate, and now I got like 3 or 4 guys, and then I'm like basically going through the book 3-4 times every week and stuff. And it was like, it was like for me, the idle hands were like the devil's playground. So I just like got super busy in AA, going to meetings and being in committees and becoming part of the service structure and being sponsored and sponsoring other guys. My whole life was about AA. And I was to the point where it was like, it's going to have to be like this for the rest of my life, because I get any idle time, or, you know what I mean? I just make really bad decisions in my head sober. And so I met I met a girl when I was 4 years sober, and I have kids or whatever. They're like in their 20s and like 13, right? I'm like done having kids, and I meet her, and then now I have a 2-year-old little girl. And I've had all boys prior to that, and like raising boys was just like, you just mean mug them and they stop doing what they're doing, right? My little girl, when I look at her and she's doing something that she's not supposed to be doing, I mean mug her, she mean mugs me back. I think the only reason she knows to say I'm sorry is because Daddy says I'm sorry when she mean mugs me back. I'm like, sorry. And her word, like this morning I made her cereal and she said, thank you, and I'm just like, man, like I think about that time when I woke up in the hotel room, right, with the stolen laptops and stuff, or the time my mug shots were all over Valley News Live and stuff, and like having a house with like 4 kids and in a relationship with my fiance, like in a neighborhood of people that I used to rob back in the day. Man, I just like, it makes me think about like how grateful I am to where I'm at today, because there was people in our rooms that they could have not pivoted that first meeting I came back. My first meeting I went back to was the Northern Plains Group. And I know which ones were working at that company because they're all in construction and they're all wearing green, and I can see them. And so I'm like sweating and anxious at this meeting, and so I'm like flanking them, like trying to like stay away from them, like a mosh pit at a Rob Zombie conference, And then they like flanked me, and then Jeff the owner came up to me, and he could have said 1,000 different things that would have ruined my opportunity, right? And he looked at me, he came up to me, and he gave me a hug, and he told me he was really happy to see me. This is a guy I robbed, who gave me a job like 3 times in AA, right? And I robbed him and police, and I got felonies and all that stuff, and he came up to me and he said he was glad to see me and gave me a hug. The next person I didn't want to see was well, now he's 13, his mom. I met her there, and when I came back, she was engaged to another guy who was my friend, and they're all going to the meeting, and I was like, did you guys not know I was going to come back to this meeting? Did not even wait, and it was just really awkward. And then she came up to me and she started crying, and she's like, I can't wait for Brecken to see you. And then her fiance came up, and he's since passed away. He overdosed and died, but she's been through a lot, like so much, with a dad who just doesn't takes off all the time. She was engaged to a guy that was in a rough patch, overdosed and died, and she's raising kids by herself. And one of the lessons that I'm just so grateful that I was sponsored through all of it, because in my head I'm like, well, just let me see my kid. Like, give me my kid. That'll fix it, And I was making like good money and stuff, and I was going to get an attorney and take her to court. And then my sponsor was like, basically it was just like, that's not how we do things anymore, And I was like, you don't get it, right? You've always been married. You've always had your kids. You're president of a company, right? You don't really get it. And, through like multiple conversations, it got to a point where it was just like, why don't you just treat her like you treat your sponsees or treat your clients, right? And I'm like, why would I do that? And in my head, it was like, because she has the most precious item in your life, and you treat people with money better than you treat her, And it's kind of like the whole idea of like, we paid oil truck drivers more than school bus drivers, right? Like, it was our precious cargo, and I'm like being a dick about it. And so I was like, I guess if I have a good idea, I'll give you a call, and he was like, probably a good idea, because you got really crappy ideas. And so one night it was snowing like crazy, and I just mentally like put myself in her shoes, not on purpose. It just kind of happened, and I realized she's got a driveway, and she's got at the time, and this is 9 years ago, and my son's 13, so like 5 or so, whatever that, and I'm not allowed to see him, and she's got a new baby, and he was gone, and I just had this thought. I was like, I should go over there and shovel her driveway, and I was like, that is a great idea. I cannot wait to tell Jeff. I have good ideas, and I'm like, hey Jeff, I'm gonna go over and shovel her driveway, and he was like. It was just weird. I think it was weird for him to hear me have like an actual good idea. Like, it was a pause. And then he proceeded to tell me, he was like, just make sure this isn't about them, right? This is about you, right? Like, don't post it on Facebook that you're shoveling your ex's driveway, right? And I was like, how did he know? like I'd already plotted it. Like, men want to be me, women want me, I get over there and I start shoveling the driveway, and I'm like 3 scoops in, and it happened, right? That ego like shows up even when you're like trying to be like of service, and I just started thinking, like, I'm feeling good. I feel amazing. I cannot wait to tell people about this, right? And she looks out the window and she sees me, and I'm shoveling faster, right? And then she like lets up the blinds and turns the light off, and I was like, this isn't even my goddamn driveway. Why am I here? Right? You should be. If I saw someone outside shoveling my driveway, I'd throw my Carhartts on and get out there and like help them. And you're inside, like it just total, redirection with my ego, and I'm upset. Like, I call. It was either, I don't really remember if it was Jeff or Fred, but I called one of those guys, and they just reminded me that like it's not about them, right? Like, it's about me and the things that I have to do if I want to stay sober. And part of my amends to her was doing things like that. And even in my amends process, when I know I'm completely corrupt and like a madman and manipulative and like will do whatever I can to make everything about me, I will make it about me, right? And what they're saying is like making it about me and being humble, right? And those like that's and so I hang up the phone, I start shoveling the driveway, and I'm thinking in my head she's gonna call the cops, right? Because I just showed up to her house with a shovel, and I finish the driveway and I leave, and I don't even really feel like I don't know what like your experience of doing service like stuff like that for other people, but I don't feel amazing. It feels really inconvenient and ugly, right? And I don't always like want to do it, you know. And my motive is that I wanted to see my kid, right? And then halfway through it just turned into just doing the job, right? Without expectation, right? So like when I'm getting helped by other people, I'm like, oh, it's super cool that they're not expecting anything in return. And then I do it and I'm like, I'm expecting everything, right? And so I leave, I go home, I don't call her, I don't text her, I don't make it about, look at what I did for you, that kind of financial, service abuse that I tend to do to others. Like if I do this for you, like it's not just a for-profit thing, it's a manipulation thing, right? And so she calls me like a week later and she's like, Adam, I need to go into work and I need a babysitter. Would you like to babysit your son? And I was like, I'm gonna have to call you back, right? Hang up the phone, and I just get like super upset, make some calls. I'm like, she called me and said, do you want to babysit your son? I'm his father, right? Like, you don't say that, right? And just made a big deal. I was willing to plant my flag on one word, right, with her. And that was what it was pointing out to me. It was like, you're willing to sacrifice everything because of one word that she said to you. You're willing to, like, all the work, everything, give up the the blessings God himself is, like, helping you get because one human being said a word that you didn't like. Who are you making this about? And I'm like, well, I'm making it about him. Like, he needs a father. And they're like, nope, wrong answer. I was like, well, I'm making it about her. She obviously needs help, right? And they're like, no, wrong answer. I was like, well, who else is there in this scenario? Obviously, you. And they're like, you, because this is the type of stuff that you need to do to destroy and starve that selfish, inconsiderate, asshole ego that you are if you ever want a shot in being sober. And I was like, you apparently are not sober. Like, you're not like, just get mad. And I needed guys like that in my life, ones that were willing to tell me what I need to hear, right? And so I call her back, and I was just like, hey, Leah, it'd be an honor to babysit my son. I couldn't resist. And so she brought him over. He's like 5'4", something like that. He just woke up Saturday morning, hair's all messed up, and he's wearing like onesie pajamas, right? And I'm like, I went and bought a Nintendo, right? Like they have Xboxes and all this stuff, but I like Nintendo, Zelda, Contra, right? And had an old TV, and I had a whole day planned out of like just doing old cool stuff, right? And I made him pancakes, and on there I put like whipped cream and chocolate chips and like Heath Bit bars and all this stuff. Like I went all out. I had no idea what I was doing. I just basically grabbed everything out of the cupboard and dumped it on there. And he comes in and I show him the stack of pancakes. He's like rubbing his eye, and then he's like patting himself, like a dog. And he like runs over to me, and then she's just like, we're sitting at the table, and I'm like, I got this, And I don't know where she was at. Like she literally just left him with a 5-time felon, you know what I mean? That like has ruined everyone's lives around him. She just like left her son with that man. It's probably what she was thinking. And so we're eating pancakes, and he's like halfway through it, right? And you can see he's like starting to get the sugar sweats, Looked like he was like in Mortal Kombat and somebody moved him, it just, and he was like, and as he's taking a bite, he's like, this cannot be good for my diabetes. And I was like, whoa! I was like, I just killed my son, And then I started, like, his mom's a nurse, and she saw we were eating pancakes, and I was, like, questioning her credentials at this time. And I called her, and I'm like, Leah, we just ate a bunch of pancakes. He's got diabetes. Why didn't you tell me I have diabetes? And she was like, oh, my God, because he doesn't have diabetes. I was like, I'm new here. And I'm like, why in the world would he have this morbid, like, type thought of, why would he say he has diabetes? And then this was the moment, like through all, like, I don't know if we all get to see God's handiwork through sponsorship and putting in the, you know what I mean? Like the end result of some things, right? We don't always get to see that. And like my icy heart towards Leah like shedded away or like melted away at that moment when she told me that Brecken has a friend at school that nobody wants to be friends with, right? Because he's, whatever the reason that kids aren't with friends, but one of the reasons is because he has diabetes and they think it's weird, right? So Brecken tells people that he also has diabetes and then sits at lunch with that kid. You know what I mean? And she did that without me, right? Like in my head, I'm like, he's gonna end up in prison or jail if I'm not there, and he's gonna be corrupt and all this stuff. He needs a dad, which is, a dad is very important, but she played both roles, and she did way better than I probably would have done in both roles, And so it just kind of went away, like the idea of like taking her to court or any of that stuff. Like I'm gonna do whatever I have to do to like make sure that she doesn't have to do anything. Right, to the point of I'll do all the pickups, I'll do all, the paying for lunch, like everything. I'm gonna do all of it, and that was a little under 9 years ago, and he's been coming to my house every weekend for the last 9 years, and it was all because I just pivoted in the direction of taking sponsor advice rather than making it about me and taking her to court, I'm way overpaid blessing wise with my kids, with my job, with the people that I get to work with. I had like 3 or 4 people that are in AA that work on the same team as I do, right? A long time ago I heard like, don't get into business with people in AA. And I'll tell you what, like I don't know where I would be if they weren't there. Like left unchecked, I could become a very corrupt business person. And having people in AA that I can trust and tell me how it is, and be willing to fight with them and then come back later and like make up with each other, and like I don't think we would be as successful as we are today if that didn't happen. And I'm just super like grateful for all of you, people all over North Dakota, that do the assemblies, that do the structure, that do the business meetings, that do all the back end work that nobody ever really gets to see, and making it possible for new guys to get help at meetings, right? And sponsors to do their jobs, and people to be willing to pivot in those meetings and make people feel included and feel that grace that feels ugly to us at times when we're doing it because of relapsing and slipping in and out from 2000 to 2013 and doing all the things that I did to people in AA. I should not be here today. My kids should not have their father. My daughter should probably not even exist, right? And because of you and because of the work that you do and the people personally to me, Jeff and Cody and many in Fargo, I get the benefit of living the best life that I ever got. And you guys also helped me hit a bucket list item. I always wanted to speak at a conference with one of my heroes, and Jeff speaks all the time, and I always fantasized when I was relapsing of being up there and speaking, at the same conference as him, and then doing a way better job, which I didn't, but but it was cool. It was a bucket list thing, and you guys made that happen without even knowing it. God works in mysterious ways, and you are doing the work, so I appreciate you. I love you. Thank you.